Hey, they still exist! And this time we're diving right into what was touted as the savior of the MMO genre by the ever-derailing hype train. Yeah, this is the game that will save the market. If yet another dime a dozen Asian fantasy grinder filled with tonal dissonance and alpha-level mechanical problems is the apparent savior of MMOs, this genre is hosed. Yeah, I'm showing my hand a bit early, but even with it plainly out there, people are still rather dedicated fans of this game, with nary a stream that went by without someone ready to go on the offensive if I dare mock the game for having a garbage translation, broken character models, or when I break the news to a child about her mother getting slaughtered by demons while wearing a Doge helmet. Another comment section to get filled with angry rants by people who will suddenly hate the game in 2 months' time anyway, and start the cycle anew with another game that looks exactly like it. It's Arc Age Black Desert and what will likely be Bless Online all over again. Welcome to the latest flavor of the month. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Revelation Online. Developed by Pangu Creator Studio in China and brought to us in the States by Russian publisher My.com, Revelation Online, or just Revelation, is known in China as Revelation, except in Chinese. A word I won't attempt to pronounce because I don't want to give pedants an opportunistic hard-on, but it's what all my recorded files are named as. Revelation was the latest game to fall under the hype train, being a property apparently popular in its host country, and being given inflated expectations by its many engineers and conductors. When I saw screenshots and videos, I had to say I was at least intrigued. When I played in the closed beta, I had no idea what everyone was so excited over. Unprepared for release didn't begin to describe it, but now that it's had plenty of time in closed beta tests and the open beta is well underway, certainly they've had time to iron out the pressing issues seen in closed beta. That's cute. During the game's side quest preview, I said a line that I'm not entirely sure where I was going with. The game is a graphical marvel with plenty of hiccups. I have no idea what was slipped in my drink, but I feel what I was really trying to say was that the game has a really pretty aesthetic. There are areas in the game that really work well when you take them in. There's a certain level of charm and flash that make for some really impressive screenshots. Because when in motion, oh boy. The game takes the classic shortcut of rendering distant models with lower frame rates than the rest of the game, and this is triggered by things being merely a few yards away. The game doesn't really seem like it came out in 2015, as it rather caught us by surprise during our streams of the game that the game wasn't much older than that. The confusion came from the rather low-quality assets, texturing, and graphics work throughout the game. Amusingly hitting you right in the beginning when the first in-game cutscene has the camera clipped through a tree and has lots of screen covered by incredibly pixelated branches. Clipping is, of course, a common issue with MMOs, but this game takes the cake with NPCs having clothing that'll clip through their body while they speak, and autopathing with the wings on will have your character do an unnecessary barrel roll at random that'll seamlessly and massively clip through the floor. Typical of most Asian MMOs, there's a lot of design dissonance within the game's art direction, with typical fantasy elements right beside mech suits, robotic wings, and giant fluffy cat mounts that look so out of place you really question why they exist. Sure, the mecha stuff looks interesting, but if this world is mech suits and motorcycles and jetpacks, then why does the rest of the universe seem so underdeveloped in technology? I know it's an Asian MMO staple, but it's pretty jarring in this game. This even gets into the design of the characters, where some look interesting and unique, while other NPCs look interesting and unique in a completely different way. Ugh. 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 Man, these Five Nights at Freddy's sequels are getting really weird. Tonal dissonance is the name of the game here, really. It's the kind of thing where you'll watch a character act really stupid or take a silly pratfall, and then you'll watch a child's parents get murdered by monsters. Dungeons will contain dangerous traps and monster-infested derelict ships, while others are a giant pile of food, a trippy skyway made of casino implements, or a sultry sex dungeon filled with towel-clad tanuki labeled Lustful Volapine, bondage-wearing fox girls named Royal Sister, and goose-stepping lolis literally tagged as Loli. Is it too late to go back to Scarlet Blade's strip club? There's an extreme abundance and reliance on cutscenes within the game, sometimes getting them back-to-back, or having an area where 3 different cutscenes will trigger within 5 feet. What can make the experience far more frustrating is that many of these cannot be skipped, and will pop up a prompt informing you of this, along with a sad emoji. If you want to add to the frustration, sometimes just showcasing the camera literally zooming in on an NPC's butt then prepare yourself for cutscenes with QTEs that don't actually matter, continuing without fail whether you press a button or not. The game does allow a few of these scenes to be skipped, but it'll bring up a prompt that if you don't watch it, you won't earn experience towards one of the factions and can't save up for those totally sick demon wings, bro. Well, bribery is a new one in terms of keeping a player base watching its cinematics. Then it turns out those wings are actually just headpiece decorations to make you look like a Morgan Ainsland cosplayer, making all that wasted time completely moot. Some cutscenes are fully rendered CG, which features strip scenes, Uncanny Valley Akuda making faces that will haunt your nightmares, or two characters that look so unlike their in-game counterparts that you wonder if the CG team had any direct contact with their in-game modelers. There's still good-looking CG scenes and interesting watches with decent action, occasionally, but they are few and far between. They beat the hell out of the 2-second pan-over-a-tree cutscenes you'll see every 15 minutes in any case. Of course, the UI is a total mess, placing bars, meters, icons, and windows all over the damn place. But if you really just want to get that uncluttered and perfectly misleading screenshot, just hit F12 to remove the UI. There's even a screenshot camera mode to let you apply Dutch angles, complete with Instagram-style color filters. No, I'm not kidding. Here we have another category that's hitting one department and missing the other, as the music itself can be pretty damned good. The title theme being so good, I'd place it on a list of my favorite login themes, and there's plenty more of note peppered into the soundtrack, as the composer has some serious pedigree behind him. I'm guessing that's where most of the budget went. You'll find your typical musical stylings of Asia with a lot of woodwind instruments, strings, and plucking to be heard. This is another one of those soundtracks that would be much better heard outside of the game. As with the usual din of sound effects, the music itself is often lost, and you're more likely to notice it when you're slowly auto-pathing to a new objective. The sound design, on the other hand, is not up to that standard, and even more hilariously will often cut out altogether for cutscenes, which, as mentioned before, happens all the time. If you thought a short cutscene of someone doing something extreme was awkward before, imagine when half the sounds don't work, and when they do, they're often out of sync with what's actually going on. Even better if the cutscene actually has no visual effects going with it, and yet people react to things like being shot by guns that never fired. The effects that are used seem a bit lackluster for what they should represent, and there are plenty of stock sounds used to add ridiculous effect to something already completely ridiculous. Outside of that, there really isn't much else to say about the game's sound work. It's subpar, but features nothing outright annoying or bad. Just nothing to keep your attention, and in a title that's this grind-heavy, that can be a major issue. While I don't have too much problem with the character creator, it's another one of those creators with odd restrictions. Sure, at first it looks very open and easily modifiable until you begin looking deeper into it. Body types are limited to specific classes, and only specific types of each gender for each class. Not to mention having a small needless cutscene play for each class that has no real relevance to the class itself, flashy as it is. The numbers within the creator are related solely to the default face you choose, and not to some pre-standardized mold, so make sure you cycle through some of the preset faces to find one at least close to how you actually want to look. Fortunately, even after you complete the work on your character, there is a window of time to edit them, even if you've already started playing. So if you got something wrong that wasn't noticeable until you started seeing them in action, you'll have the opportunity to fix your character, which is a rather welcome addition for the game. Your current class choices are limited to Gunslinger, or ranged attacker, Vanguard, a tanky spear and shield defender, Blade Master, a combo-focused sword user, Sword Mage, your basic elemental mage as their sword might as well be a staff, Spirit Shaper, a nature-focused healer, and Occultist, the best class in the game, as it can stance switch between damage and healing, has a ton of AoE, a good amount of health, and defense. They're not just for scythe-wielding edgelords anymore. When you wake up to start the game proper, you begin in your typical idyllic village, during a peaceful celebration that in no way will be attacked or partially burnt to the ground. Granted, it's an effective but tired opening for the call to adventure, but used so often it's practically cliché parody. Though we do get some of the most awkward cutscenes imaginable, which gives a pretty good indication of how the game's story will play out. In fact, story issues can be easily summed up by the first major character introduced to you in a really sloppy-looking Borderlands-style titled freeze frame. The almost ironically titled Pride of the Guardians, Akuda! A shonen anime popped-collar vest-wearing shirtless dude bro who shows off his prowess by constantly demanding you buy him food, failing at basic tasks, standing around during combat sections, and throwing up. Which one time he failed at that as well.
Ocean travel always makes Akuda seasick! And T-posed!
Akuda's the kind of character that makes me think we're being a bit too harsh on Hajun from Blade and Soul, and you're stuck with him through the majority of the story. Other characters get introduced, killed off, and tossed to the wayside or completely forgotten, and none really feel memorable for any reason that I'd want to remember them, if I can even remember how they appeared in the first place. Purely subjective, I know, but oh boy, coupled with this translation, it's another MMO birdemic. I feel like I have to apologize to Hero Wars now. The gameplay itself isn't bad, but it really depends on which class you pick as to how fluid the combat will feel. For example, the Sword Mage can feel kinda sluggish, while the Occultist feels like it has just the right amount of movement and wind-ups to keep your combat feeling weighty without feeling like you're stuck in the mud. Each class also has a stance switch mechanic that unlocks at various levels and modifies your standard skills to the stance whenever you swap over. Thankfully, leveling initially is incredibly quick, so feel free to try out every class until you find the one you want to play, as later on the grind wall becomes incredibly ruthless. Questing is extremely straightforward, and leveling is pretty fast. Initially. You'll follow plenty of story quests with the anime frat boy, a drunk-looking loli but not technically loli, and Empress Resting Bitch Face, while looking to defeat the Great Kraken, a tiny dragon named after the taxonomic term for snake, before meeting with the drunken redneck fox prince and his immature-acting girlfriend who speaks in third person. Along the way, you'll also be introduced to grindable story dungeons, which unlock into regular dungeons, both in traditional instance and boss events, as well as endlessly respawning mob grind form. You can also get levels by giving Trials a run, which is a run-through with several bosses and events that you can solo grind for XP and materials. Those can be a bit fun, and occasionally the fights or events have a clever gimmick behind them, even if most amount to, now fight this thing until one of you dies. This grind wall kicks on around level 39, though you really feel it when going from 41 to 42, as all your experience grinds to a crawl and requires multi-millions of XP to level up. There's also another odd mechanic with leveling, as once you hit level 39, you no longer automatically level up upon filling the bar. Instead, now, you have to actually go into your character sheet and hit the level up button. The game, and some of the more ardent defenders, will claim this system allows you to choose when you are ready to level up, but in practice, people use the feature to stick to very specific level milestones and better destroy lower-level players in PvP. This odd choice exists among many, and one of the most typical issues for Asian MMOs, inventory and currency overload. You'll have faction-specific points, items that are used to buff other items to craft better items, 4 different main currencies, separate currencies for specific vendors, specialty items used to upgrade equipment, mounts, and wings, scrolls used to increase inventory slots, special fortune egg items used at the fortune egg, upgradable items for use in the soul grid, which acts as yet another leveling system, scrolls to upgrade your special abilities, special potions that can only be used in specific circumstances, and my god, where does it end? It's seriously easy to completely overflow your inventory constantly, and even better, some of these items are so specific in their use, and yet completely vague on what that means. Thankfully, you can stack bound and non-bound items together by binding the unbound ones, and keeping them from taking up 2 separate slots, which I wish more games with a soul-binding system would incorporate, even if it doesn't fix the main issue in this case. Hitting help to make sense of the mess accumulating in your inventory, or the dozens of confusing systems the game will toss your way, will often bring up text documents fully in Chinese, so you're SOL unless someone translated it on one of the many contradictory guides spread all over the internet. We bring this up because just look it up on a wiki was dubbed the obvious solution in Twitch chat from a few dismissive individuals. Listen, if you need to constantly check outside sources for mechanics integral to the game, then that game wasn't made very well. Compound this lack of explanation and translation when you run into quests that simply aren't translated. Our personal biggest annoyance being multi-choice quizzes that remain in Chinese, have to be answered all in a row lest you abandon the quest and retry, and those questions and answers themselves are randomly arranged so you can't just remember the order you pressed them in. Frustration extends into the crafting system, which seems to take the worst aspects of World of Warcraft. You know, constant creation of lesser items to level up high enough and get into higher tiers, while taking the worst aspects of Arcage's system, having fatigue on crafting that only regenerates at a reasonable rate if you're subscribed. Furthering the issue is that gathering nodes, which also burn through your fatigue meter, are located in incredibly specific areas with low respawn rates. While it may become viable later on, starting out the crafting grind is incredibly slow, and unless you're a paying subscriber, you'll need to spend many hours logged in just to earn enough points to harvest a single node to completion. This will lead us into the community as well, since, like many Asian MMOs, you can simply just turn other people invisible, and since other people might not be able to see you, you may think that they're actively trying to steal nodes from you. Sure, some of them are, but it's a bit more complicated than that, so we might as well just push on to that section. Let's get to the most obvious and immediately apparent issue. The game is overrun with gold spam bots. It does not matter what channel you switch to or what chat you look at, there will be bots constantly spamming and advertising their shady service. You might think that making a new chat tab and trimming the channels down to the bare minimum will solve this issue, but you cannot escape the bots. As part of the usual staple for Asian MMOs, there's a shout and global channel that cannot be muted, in which you need to use easily earned conch trumpets to broadcast a message that everyone will see. Needless to say, the bots are taking advantage of this channel as it cannot be shut off. In keeping with Asian MMO staples, you have the ability to hide other players, which has practical benefits, like increasing your frames per second, reducing load times, and helping you enjoy the story and environments without the crowd blocking your views. The negatives of the system are what indirectly contribute to making the crafting system such a nightmare, as some people may seem to be trying to steal your gather nodes from you, but they might not even realize you're there. This is not to excuse all of the player base, as there is a very rampant and extreme FYGM attitude among mob grinders and crafters. And if you notice a player spamming attacks at you, attempting to train mobs on you, or making rude remarks because you dared to harvest a node, you've seen the iceberg's tip of this treatment. For myself, personally, we received a lot of fervent defenders of the game within our Twitch chat, many incredibly hostile. At least for the first few days, and the last few days, streaming was relatively calm and jovial. The hostility even leaked into the game itself at one point, as a pair of these dedicated individuals started harassing me in-game, trying to make me quit because you stream and said bad things about the game, so leave. Which is always a great way to put your community's best foot forward. Though, granted, I was also the top viewed streamer for Revelation on all of Twitch at the time, and I barely broke 70 viewers on average. Make of that what you will. Fortunately, there's a typical party system and guild system, though the latter has a bit of an added depth with the idea of territory control in guild bases. Now, we couldn't delve into this all that much, as the guild system requires 10 players to form. If it doesn't, it'll also dissolve after a set period of time, and requires a not quite hefty but still pretty steep guild charter cost that kept us from making a temporary grindstone. If you watched the streams, you knew we were not getting 10 people to go into this with us. Unfortunately, the PvP within the game can be charitably described as token and broken, and a very vocal group within the community also declares it as pay to win. But a larger issue is the matchmaking and level disparity. Revelation has that odd system where once you hit level 39, you then need to choose when you want to level up from each time then on. The lowest PvP bracket starts from 40 up to 49. Players will then get to level 49 and refuse to level up, so they can instead completely crush lower level players in the PvP and never need to leave the small pond. Sure, some still may be working their way up, but others are likely avoiding level 50, where the player kill system is activated into the open world. But you can be sure there are a sizable amount of decked out level 49 players going the easy mode route in PvP. The matchmaker doesn't help matters at all, as it doesn't even try to balance out class types or levels, instead throwing everyone in regardless. Our first class saw us with a decent mix of level 40 to 47 players, coupled with a few 49s mixed in, while the enemy team had nobody under level 46, and tons of level 49 players, who in turn were completely unkillable by most of us, regardless of what class they were or how many players were targeting them. It's a dime a dozen PvP system, with a basic point capture gameplay, and there's even a MOBA-like second PvP arena that really isn't interesting enough to warrant the hassle. A hassle that doesn't even have the end-of-game scoreboard working properly, considering every match claims to end in a draw, with all the match accolades being granted to long player name. Working as intended, am I right? Coming into this, we expected to find a game would fall into the usual trappings of pay to win, yet we were rather surprised when it didn't. Though, we'll have to make a note that the PvP community is absolutely screaming that pay to win does exist in some form. We haven't really seen it or anything that seems to kind of translate like that, save for some VIP boosts maybe? But that's very much up to the individual where they stand and not an outright clear-cut example. If any PvP vets of the game care to explain what the damage is in the comments, you are more than welcome to. Maybe I'll pin it. For what is in the cash shop, you'll be left with one overwhelming feeling. Is that it? Seriously, the cash shop feels very barren, with only a handful of outfits making up the apparel section, and most of the other tabs being filled with one item each. You can't help but feel like something was gutted. What is here are the typical rental or buy outfits, though they seem to be a bit pricey with the odd exchange rate. Said exchange rate is weirdly complicated, but we will at least share the lowest prices. 150 orums for $2.19, and 375 for $5.49 respectively. The rest, you can find on screen. With these set prices in mind, a lot of the rentals will run you $6, or a whopping $24 if you want to unlock one permanently. Granted, at the moment there is a sale, but it's not like that's going to last forever. While it will be up to the individual if they find the price is worth it, really, it's just far too expensive feeling for what amounts to a skin. Of course, this wouldn't be a cash shop, let alone an Asian MMO cash shop, without the typical lucky boxes that have become an unfortunate staple of the market. These take the form of lucky boxes for mounts, wings, and exclusive items, and the only way you can get mounts and wings on the cash shop. Even if you saw someone running around in a mount or flying on a pair of wings you actually want, your likely option is to gamble and hope you win it from the boxes. Keep in mind, though, the boxes don't guarantee that you'll actually get a mount or wings in them either, as I found out the hard way when I player traded some Orums for a wing box and got upgrade feathers instead. Far more of the cash shop is dedicated to random items, and yet more lucky boxes that can give you random bits of loot used to trade to specific NPCs. This feeds back into that idea of item overload and the what does any of this mean kind of thing that plagues Asian MMOs in general. It adds yet another layer of confusion on top of it. Really, this is a cash shop that doesn't make it easy to get into, and looking through it you'll more often than not come away confused as about what anything might be used for. There just isn't much to talk about here. There's so little substance and yet so much that's left completely vague, or even worse, are just merely lucky boxes, so it's tough to give a logical look into this cash shop at all. Fortunately, you don't have to spend any money, as you can actually trade in-game cash for the cash shop currency, much like Star Trek Online. Well, it's a clear case of your mileage may vary, but the shop here just isn't all that well designed in the first place. Playing this was a thing. I know people are out there who like it. If some of the more interesting messages we got streaming on Twitch are any indication, they like it to a militant degree. But I'm hard-pressed to think that this will find a decent market following. This game style was done better many times over in other games. Hell, the closed beta was enough to turn plenty off to the game, and those coming back in hopes they'd fixed most of that stuff would receive the shock of a lifetime. I'm now wondering if Bless is going to fare even remotely better, or we're just going to have to write off World MMO as we know it. Here's my final rating. The screenshots got people hyped for a reason. This game can be really pretty when it wants to be, and when the aesthetic goes for an actual aesthetic rather than just weirdly bouncing around all over the place, it works. I mean, did you notice how much care, detail, and attention was put into that stupid Doge mask? Sure, it's a ridiculous out-of-place meme, but it is a fantastic-looking ridiculous out-of-place meme. And when the game wants to look gorgeous and provide you with an impressive visual, it does. Combat is about as solid for a tab-target action hybrid as it gets, and great care was placed into the control styles, ensuring that they all work as intended. Even ignoring class-based control recommendations, each control style feels fine for any type of class, and it helps keep that action feel going. I don't really have much to complain about there, it's fun and solid. Classes feel varied and interesting too, with each one having a unique way to play, and alternate stances that make them feel fresh and interesting from the others. Even if the Occultist is like a much better version of the Sword Mage, at least they don't play in a similar manner, making you feel like you're retreading ground with a reroll. Go ahead and try each one out and settle into your favorite. VIP time seems almost mandatory with the ridiculous grind walls that you'll hit hard, fast, and repeatedly, and getting some goodies daily isn't a bad trade-off as well. Of course, that means you're paying the game to exist and possibly paying to enjoy it, so make of that option what you will. It's not quite the amazing but gameplay unnecessary trade-off of Elder Scrolls VIP time, but it's still the best investment out of all your options. Despite pay-to-win talk flourishing within the PvP community, at least the shop consists mostly of cosmetics, with some decent options among them. Even if I don't consider many of the outfits worth it, there's at least some variety there that thankfully doesn't have stat boost plastered on it. Just be wary of the rentals. You were like watching and looking at this, right? Maybe the stream? A closed beta that felt like a rough alpha led to an open beta that feels like a rough alpha. You can cling to those beta pearls all you like, but I am hard-pressed to believe this game's going to change any of these core problems. The game's been around since 2015 in China. It's feature complete. All they had to do was translate it, and they didn't even do that correctly. The level of unpolish here is making Arcade look like an unparalleled masterpiece. It's not just the rough translation, it's the rough everything. I've seen less T-poses in a Ubisoft game, and graphical problems permeated every level of this game, from a clunky UI, quests requiring specific answers that were never given to you or flat out wrong, horribly animated or rendered 3D models and characters, and items having 2 to 3 different names. It left everything in this game feeling like a lazy patch job or a joke gone seriously wrong. You're gonna have to suspend a lot of disbelief. What is it with Chinese MMOs and having a separate system, point level, currency, and item grind to obtain anything? Just when you think this game's making sense, they throw another arbitrary system your way to confuse you further. From the labor point and crafting, the aptitude system, equipment upgrades, skill upgrades, special skill upgrades, faction levels, star essence, path unlocks, and the soul grid to name a few, all being on separate complex systems, is a nightmarish hodgepodge of nonsensicality, improperly tutorialized or introduced. I didn't cover most of them because none felt necessary for progression, and they all kept popping up as new annoyances. And no, just look it up on a wiki is not a good dismissal of a game's issue. Wikis should be for deeper reference and theory crafting, not fan-made online instruction manuals. We shouldn't have to rely on an outside community to properly explain something that's been localized. Either explain these features in your game properly, or cut some of this crap out already. I've played my fair share of unoptimized, bad-looking, or technically flawed games and still enjoyed them. But my one point that I cannot tolerate is scripted grind walls, especially after the leveling pace was so generally quick and fair. You'll leap from 1 to 39 in a dedicated day of playing, but after that point, the pace slams to a halt, forcing you to complete hours of gameplay to edge the bar ever further. When my last stream had me grind to 46 just to continue the story from a halfway point, we underwent 3 hours of story and questing that, come completion, told us we had to grind to 50 to continue the story, and those 3 hours of gameplay didn't even get us halfway into level 46. I was done. If you think diving through the MMO equivalent of hoops lined with flaming dog vomit is somehow a testament to your worth as a human being, more power to you. But to speak for myself and possibly many others, I ain't having that shit. If you enjoy the game, you better really enjoy it to put up with these. But if you only enjoy it on the same level you'd enjoy something like The Room or Birdemic, this is an outright deal breaker. Despite the recent news and the recent side quests, I don't think I'm going to see anything I've been looking forward to come out this month. Let alone we don't even have release dates on half that stuff. But we'll likely be back with something that only recently underwent a free-to-play conversion. One of those free-to-play conversions.
The coot is the pride of the Guardians! Now to swallow your soul like I swallow braised pork!
Oh, cool, I have to limit these to 20 seconds now. Thanks, YouTube. Left window, Atlas Reactor. Right window, Splatoon 2 preview. Follow me on Twitter at ChaosD1 and at MMO_Grinder. Support the show at patreon.com/MMO Grinder. And check out my live streams on twitch.tv/ChaosD1. Did I make it? Close enough.